everybody, and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about The Sentry, Issue 1, written by Paul Jenkins, with art by Christian Rosado, colours by Matt Miller, and letters by Joe Caramagna. The Sentry and his creator Paul Jenkins return for a brand new series which sees Robert Reynolds, the original Sentry, return as the man sits alone in the watchtower, his only companion his faithful canine watchdog. The duo head up to the roof as Bob remembers learning about Laika, the Russian dog that went into space. Bob was obsessed with space and the dog as a child, learning all about her, including how she was given a one-way ticket into space and died just hours after takeoff, which made young Robert cry for a year. Learning this was also the first time the void ever entered his heart. Man, I've missed the Sentry so much. I know we had that recent series where his power was passed to someone else, and there were hints that he was coming back in that series, as well as, I believe, in some Doctor Strange stuff, there was some inkling that the Sentry was coming back, but this is like the proper return to that. It looks like this book is sidestepping all of that, at least for now, which is probably for the best. Already we've got the Watchtower back, Bob is here, Watchdog is here, and Paul is back writing his creation. It all just feels right. Bob's third-person account of his own life is cool as well, and it adds this really strange, uncomfortable feeling to the dialogue. Like, it's something like we shouldn't be seeing, but we are. Bob remembers Laika and how he's been searching the stars for the dog ever since he learned about her. And he thinks about the life outside of Earth and how he's done terrible things to it as the void. He thinks that he needs to go to see someone about that and the void within him, since he's so alone and has no one around him. Paul jumping back into his creation of Bob and, exploring his mental health and the void is perfect, since I'm sure a lot of new readers will be maybe coming into the book because they saw the Sentry in the Thunderbolts movie and thought, hey, that's a cool character, let's read up about him. Which, that movie did a pretty good job touching on Bob's mental health, but it really only scratched the surface of what's really going on in his head. So Paul taking his creation back into that first and foremost is wonderful, and I also kind of like that it didn't MCU-ify Bob at all. He's not Lewis Pullman at all in this. He's just Bob as we know and love him. Away from the tower down in Hell's Kitchen, Wilson Fisk kills a man, telling his men to go and completely destroy his family's lives for what this man did to him. Fisk is soon confronted by the Void, who says that he just wants to talk. Wilson, of course, doesn't really care for the shadowy bum in an alleyway and decides to set his goons on the Void. However, the Void just tells the men to go into space, and they do. Also, he and Fisk can talk in private. Wilson immediately realizes who this man is, visibly scared by the Void. The Void showing up this early in the book kind of surprised me and caught me off guard. I figured we would build up to the, the release of the Void again. But I like that we just see him here in the opening pages. He's out here making deals with Kingpin, confronting Wilson Fisk for what he has done. I also really love the way he is drawn, with Christian Rosado painting them in deep black and blues that kind of blend into the background of these pages, which I really like because the Void is more or less like a shadow. So of course it would like kind of blend in with like the background of like an alleyway and not really stand out unless you're like actually looking at it. So I really like that. I really like that they've made him effectively just part of the scenery, because he is. The Void is always around. It's always, you just don't see it all the time. The Void demands that Wilson beg for him, knowing that Fisk likes to send messages, the dead man in the alleyway being one of them, and the Void loves to send messages of his own, demanding Wilson pay attention. He quietly tells Fisk that he's going to take everything he holds dear and destroy it very slowly and very painfully, all because he hates Wilson Fisk. Wilson doesn't really understand why, since he's not one of the hero-villain types, but Void knows that he's just a test case to see if it would work on other people. Wilson begs for his life, demanding to understand, but Void leaves, knowing that his kind never do understand. Kingpin getting a moment with the Void really surprised the heck out of me. I know they've briefly kind of tangled when Sentry teamed with Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the like, but he's such an other end of the spectrum villain for Sentry. Like, Sentry is like a character who can move planets, and then you have Wilson Fisk, who's, the street level crime. So it's like worlds apart, but I kind of like they're bringing them together. And I love the fear that Wilson shows here after he realizes who he's talking to. He's not just talking to some guy he can just shoot or have killed. He's talking to literally a god, and that scares the shit out of him. Sometime later, the Avengers call a press conference where Lindy Reynolds, Bob's wife, talks with Sue Storm and the other Avengers about Bob rejoining them, with the press conference being there to announce his return. Behind the scenes, Bob talks with Reed, nerding out a little bit about how he got Clock and the Watchtower up and running and upgraded them. Reed is really happy to have his old nerd friend back, but hopes that Bob talked to Lindy about all of this. Bob thinks about telling Reed about all the terrible things he did while he was the Void out in space, and what he did out in the distant parts of the galaxy, but Bob decides against that and waves it off, telling Reed that he'll talk with his wife, but everything will be fine. The press conference gets underway and the Sentry is welcomed back into the Avengers, telling the press that he was away dealing with cosmic issues that are of no importance. I do like that they aren't even really bothering trying to explain away, like, really what happened with Bob, because he was killed by Null, but that death wasn't really a death because it was one of those weird, we have to set up our villain and show how strong they are death, and he came back in some Doctor Strange stuff, but it wasn't really him, it was like Ghost that was possessing his body. So there's all this like really weird shit, but I just like that Paul just doesn't bother with any of that and just was like, it was out in space, we don't need to go into detail, that's not what this story is about. We just give that little bit and then we can just move on. And I think that's the best way to do things. The hint at the Void taking over while he was in space, though, is kind of awesome, and I'd like to see a little bit more of that, like a far-off world that gets terrorized by the Void or something. Maybe we'll see a little bit more about it in this series, because there are hints that we do see Bob sort of start to think about that sort of stuff in these panels here, where he thinks about like subjugating a world and stuff like that. So maybe we'll see more of that sort of stuff here. The voice, which is the Void of course, is telling him to reveal all of what he has done to everyone out in space and just reveal it all to everyone and give in. It's like the devil on his shoulder. But it also is one that kind of helps him as well, because it tells him in this situation he's just got to kind of glad hand and kind of put on the pony show for the people and just kind of act the hero and the friend and the chummy hero and all that sort of stuff to ingratiate himself to the people, give the people a show for the hero they know and love. Sentry does exactly that, stopping for photo ops with Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic as the voice reminds him to do whatever he can to hide the pain. Later, as he takes Watchdog for a walk, he finds something is off with his faithful companion, and later on, Bob talks with Lindy about his time in space, but he very clearly does not want to talk about that or bring it up in any conversation. It clearly is something he doesn't like talking about, and is kind of being forced to just sort of play chummy husband, kind of tell his wife what he was up to while he was in space, but he doesn't really want to do that. Lindy does manage to break him from his thoughts as Bob tells her about Watchdog and how he is sick. Lindy hopes that he can do something for the dog, maybe even the Sentry can, but Bob says that he'll have Clock scan the dog to see what's wrong. Bob promises his sad wife that he'll do everything in his power to make sure that Watchdog is okay. So Sentry hasn't really appeared at all this issue. We've seen him a little bit here and there, but I am just kind of hooked by all of this drama with Bob Reynolds' life, the struggle he has to go through to keep both sides of him intact. All he just wants to do is be a good husband, a friend, a hero, but the Void is just preventing him from doing that and preventing him from reaching his full potential, because he'll always just kind of bring himself down and let the Void take over. As I said before, there would have been a really easy thing to do here where you could make it more sort of MCU friendly, but I like that Paul didn't do that at all. This is just like the Sentry he was writing back in the day, and I love that. Elsewhere in the South Pacific, a holiday resort for the rich and famous is crashed by the Void, who tells his cat that surf's up. The Void summons a giant tidal wave onto the island, telling the screaming and running rich people to calm down since they're all wealthy, so they should have some decorum. The Void spots some of the locals to the island, and on the advice of his cat Scaredy, he decides to save them, teleporting them to the top of the island mountain and to dry land. So I'm getting the theme here. The Void is targeting the rich and elite. You know, he's targeted Wilson Fisk and his operations, and now they're going after all of these rich Epstein Island rich people guys, which is intriguing. The Void, to me, has never really cared about who or what he kills. It's kind of indiscriminate in that way. But I like that this is some sort of targeted killings, and makes me think, like, is maybe Bob in control of the Void this time round and is using that power to exact revenge on things that he can't do as the Sentry? Like, he's using the Void as sort of like the scapegoat. That's kind of what I'm getting the feeling here. Like, he has some sort of control over the Void now that he's kind of given into it and is able to focus that energy onto dealing with some of the world's worst criminals. Later on, the Avengers respond to the incident, trying everything to stop the oncoming waves from destroying nearby islands, but Sentry has it handled, wanting the Avengers to tell Reed he's enacting Halcyon mode. Sentry speeds at the waves, using his electrical powers to turn the wave to steam and clouds. Sentry warns Reed that it's probably going to rain in the islands for the next few weeks, so they better prepare for flooding. As the Avengers begin wrapping up everything, Sentry doesn't stick around, instead speeding off back to Watchtower, where he hears the news reporting on his rescue with the Avengers. We also learned that the island that we saw the Void attack a couple of pages ago was kind of an evil island. It was kind of like it was pretty much the Epstein Island. It was owned by a disgraced billionaire named Andrew Forster, who also happened to be friends with Wilson Fisk. Again, it's all coming together. Void is not just also targeting the rich and elite people of the world, but he's also targeting all of Fisk's friends and kind of dismantling everything he can about Fisk. On top of the news reporting on the island, the news also details how a nearby entire village was enveloped in a type of crystalline substance, and the Hulk is currently rampaging through the Tunguistan forests. Sentry drowns out the sounds of the news as he checks on Watchdog, who he's put inside a clock so it can be scanned, something which reminds him of Leica. As the scans continue, the news reports start back up, detailing more of Kingpin's recent unlucky streaks as his businesses have been burning down, along with all of the weird electrical blackouts plaguing New York. One of these blackouts soon hits Watchtower, which Sentry wants Clock to check out and determine what the hell is exactly going on there. While the AI runs that in the background, Bob sets it into therapy mode, talking to the AI as if it was his therapist, which isn't very healthy at all in my opinion. Like, talking to an AI and making an AI your therapy person is just wrong. That does not seem right at all. Bob thinks that it's possible to lie to himself and truly believe it, but Clock thinks that maybe it's something that might be related to bipolar or schizophrenia, but Bob doesn't think it's some type of mental illness, but it's like he has needed to lie to himself for a reason and he's managed to do it. He just doesn't know how. Clock doesn't understand the question, and so Bob reveals to it that he's done some things he's very ashamed of. The voice comes back into his head, telling Bob that he doesn't need therapy to know what's going on with himself, since the Void has tipped the scales in its favor and it is winning. He's broken from his thoughts by Clock finishing his scans on Watchdogs, apologizing to Bob for his findings. I'm really liking what Paul is doing here with Watchdog being sick and there's nothing Sentry can do to help him. It's kind of like the classic thing, like we see it with like Superman, where, you know, he can't ever save Pa Kent from dying of a heart attack because, you know, that's not a power he has. He doesn't have the stop heart attack power, and he's kind of powerless to do that. And here we have Sentry effectively going through the same stuff with Watchdog. We don't actually learn what Watchdog has, but it's essentially the same thing where it's something that he cannot help and cannot fix. You know, with all this power he cannot fix, and that sends him into a bit of a spiral, especially because it's tying greatly into this whole overarching story of Leica and how Bob was obsessed with Leica and wanting to try and find that dog and try to save that dog, but he knows he couldn't save that dog back then, and maybe he thought he could save Watchdog, but he's finding out he can't. So again, it's just going to make him spiral and dive deeper into the Void. Sentry soon feels the Void burst out of him, the power to the entire city going out as he does. Clock tells the Sentry of the multiple reports of unexplained anomalies across the city, and the Avengers have been dispatched. And out in the city, the Avengers are not having a good time, with the crystalline growth the news mentioned earlier now spreading throughout the city, and according to Captain America, across the globe. Captain America is blasted back off the car he's standing on as the Hulk arrives, having been infected by the crystal stuff, and is going on a rampage now through the city. Iron Man calls for Sentry to come back them up, but Bob tells Clock not to answer, very clearly taken over by the Void, which he now listens to, which tells Bob that it's coming and there's nothing he can do. Spider-Man is blasted by the crystalline substance as Void tells Sentry that he couldn't save Leica and he can't save Watchdog, so he needs to admit that he cannot even save himself. What a way to end the first issue, having the hero of the book, the titular Sentry, already being brought to his lowest point. Part of me wants him to go through that, that classic hero route where, he rises to the occasion and becomes the hero he knows he can be to defeat the Void, but that's not the type of story that the Sentry does. So I'm very much looking forward to what Paul has in store for the Sentry and where he's going to take him if we're just opening the first issue with, he's already, consumed by the Void. It's a hell of a gambit, and I'm really looking forward to it. The Sentry issue 1 was a fantastic return to both Sentry and his creator, Paul Jenkins. I love that we just kind of dove back into Bob Reynolds' messed up life, taking a classic superhero feat of saving the dog, saving the animal, and creating a gripping and dramatic and really sad moment for Bob, where he realizes despite all of the power of the Sentry, he is just a man and he cannot do everything, and that sends him spiraling, and of course means the Void always comes back. I'm so ready for this series. I'm really looking forward to the Sentry. I'm a huge fan of the Sentry, and so far we're off to a great start, and I'm intrigued to see what Paul is going to put the Sentry through. I'm going to give this issue a 10 out of 10.